We've got one last topic in our journey through writing classes that we're going to take a look at. So we need a new class to work with, and we're just going to go back to one of the originals and look at our duck class again. So I'm going to write a really basic version of this. We're going to leave out a lot of the things we had in here before. And I'm also going to make some changes to my duck class that I typically wouldn't suggest that you use. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a couple variables. Normally, I would create a new variable that is private. So if I want to have the name, for example, we'll have a private string in the name, and I'll just set it equal to the empty string to start off with. Now, what I'm going to do here, though, that's slightly different, just because I don't want to waste my time writing getter and setter methods, is that I want to make this public so that we can access it later. So I got the name, and then we've got another string, which is the profession of the duck, and that is also the empty string. Okay, and then we will write a quick constructor here. So public, and then duck, and it's going to take in my name of the duck, and then it's going to take in my profession as well. Profession. All right. And then I'll assign those. So this dot name equals name, and this dot profession equals profession. So what I'm doing here is what we've done many times before, which is I've created two instance variables. And just to confirm that we're all on the same page here, the reason I call them instance variables is that when I create a new instance of the duck class, then these variables, the name and profession variables, will both be in each new duck that I make. So each new instance of the duck class will have these different attributes in there, and they'll be different for every single duck. And so if you remember back when we made our first ducks way back in the day, the other thing that we had in there was we gave them an ID number. Now, what we did at the beginning was we just said, okay, here's the ID number of the duck, and we just let the user assign it to be whatever value we wanted. Now, in reality, normally that's not how ID numbers work. The first duck should get the number 0, and the second one will be 1, and the third one would be 2, and so on, right? And so I want to set up something that allows me to actually do that. So I'm going to make a new variable here. So this is public, an integer, and this is going to be my ID number. And then we'll just set it to be 0. But so then I want to, inside of my constructor, be able to set this .id to be essentially the number of ducks that I've had so far. So how do I go about doing that? Well, I need to be able to actually count how many ducks that I have made. And the question, or rather the way that I can figure that out is by keeping track inside of a variable. But the issue is all my variables that I have here, they're all instance variables. They're all variables that will have a new value for each new duck that I make. So in steps are our last thing here in classes that we're going to talk about, and that is the static keyword. What static allows us to do is create both attributes, so variables, and methods that are not for a specific object. They are for the class instead. So what I can do here is I can make a new variable, public, and then I'll call it static instead. And this will be an integer that's going to keep track of the count of how many ducks I have. When I first start this, my count will be at 0. And what I want to do is then every time I create a new duck to increment this count by 1. So here's what I'm going to do. Whenever I create a new duck, I'm going to assign name to be name, my profession to be profession, and then my ID number will be whatever count is. So for the very first duck that I make, it'll get the value of count, which is 0. So it'll get count. And then what I want to do is, since I've created a new duck, I want to increment count by 1. So I will increment count by 1. So to be clear, what's happening here is that in this constructor, what I've done is I've created not created, but I've updated 3 instance variables, and then I've updated 1 class variable. So this count is going to be the same value no matter which duck I'm talking about. In fact, the ducks themselves don't hold on to this variable. It gets stored someplace else. but it can be referenced by any duck. It is a class variable. It's there for the entire class. So let's go ahead and check this out and see what happens. I'm going to need a new class here. Actually, I'm clicking on the wrong thing. So new file and then duck tester Java. All right, so public class duck tester. And the exciting thing here is that we are so close to finally like knowing what this entire line of code does. We've been writing this line right here: public static void main string array args. We've been writing this thing since basically day one of Computer Science A, and we're almost to a point where we know what all these things are. We know what public means. We're learning about static right now. We know what void means. Main is just the name of the method. We know what strings are. The last thing though is we need to talk about what string arrays, what arrays are. So we're so close, and that's the next unit. So really close to being able to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new duck. So I'm going to have duck, and then this is going to be duck1, and that'll be equal to new and duck, and then we've got the name's going to be Alan. That's Alana. Alan, and then he is a computer scientist. Great. Perfect. And then I'm going to create a new duck, and this is duck2. Shouldn't have capitalized that. Duck2, and this will be new duck, and its name is Grace. I put a space in there, didn't I? Grace. Perfect. All right. And she is also a computer scientist. Let's capitalize that again. All right. So here's what I should be able to do. Is that I should be able to figure out information about these ducks. In fact, what I'm going to go back and do is create one more method. What I should have done to begin with is just a toString method. So this is public, and then it's going to return a string. ToString takes in nothing. So this is going to allow me to actually print something out about my ducks. What it's going to do is it's going to return the value of, let's see. So I'll have this dot name plus is a, and then the profession. This dot profession. With ID. This dot ID. I'm really struggling here. Okay, so it returns the name. Plus is a profession with ID, this ID. Perfect. All right. So let's learn about our ducks that we just made. I'm gonna system.out.println, and then okay, so we've got duck1. We'll print out that, and then we'll system.out.println, and then duck2, and we'll see what happens here. Let's go ahead and save. I'm going to run this. Java, compile. This is duck tester. Duck tester. Oh, I am always shocked whenever that works for the first time. All right. So I've got my two ducks. I've got Alan, he's a computer scientist, ID number 0. And Grace is a computer scientist with ID number 1. So that's great. That did exactly what we wanted it to. So what's worth noting here is that for each of these, they both got their ID number from count. But count increased from one duck to the next. All right, so let's go ahead and take, let me pull this back out. Take a look here at what's actually going on underneath the hood real quick. So I'm going to switch over to my drawing space. Okay, so as we know, there are two things going on here. I've got my stack, and I've got my heap. All right, heap. All right, so what we did was we created a new duck, and we called it duck1, and what it was equal to was a new, and then duck, and then what did it take in? It took in the name, which was Alan, and then took in what he was, which is a computer scientist. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and write out the other line too, which is that we created duck2, which took in a new, or made a new duck. Its name was Grace, and also a computer scientist. Okay, So whenever these lines of code are run, when I look at the first one here, this tells me that I'm going to create a new spot on the stack. It's going to have the variable duck1. And since it's an object, it has this new keyword. I should be doing this in a different color, I feel like. Let's switch to red-ish. Red. It is equal to, since it's a new duck, I'm going to allocate a new space in the heap over here. And this is going to be duck1. And what it's going to get is the name Alan is going to be stored in there for the name, and then the his job is going to be computer scientist, right? And so what this actually holds is a memory address. So let's say this is the very first memory address. And then the additional thing that happens is that whenever I create my first new duck, it actually allocates another space over here, which is going to be for the count. So when I create my first new duck, what happens is count was 0. And so when I set my ID for this duck will be equal to 0, and then I'll increment count to be 1. Okay, so count gets stored on the heap just like my my objects do, but the difference is that it doesn't actually get stored in one of my objects. It's not exclusive to that object or to any of those instances. It is a variable for the class itself. So then when I go and I make my second duck here, I make duck2, duck2. See, now it just looks gross because I've got so many things going on. New duck over here. So I have some new space. It's going to be memory address 1. And this is duck2. And its name is Grace. CS. All right, so I've allocated that space for it. Now, what happened is we remember that the ID that it got was from what count currently is, which is 1. So it gets set equal to 1, and ID gets updated to be 2, right? So I've got these two different things that are going on in the heap here. I have my objects, which are right here, and I also have my class variables. In this case, the count is stored over here as well. So this is what the static keyword does for me whenever I have variables inside a class. It creates what we call class variables. They are values that can be accessible by the entire class itself. So what I can do with this then is, let's go back to this. What I can do with this then is I can also create static methods, right? Now, I can obviously get the count value right now. I created it to be public. Let's say we want to create a method that gets that. Well, I don't want to create a method that is for an object. I don't want to call it on an object. I just want to be called a method that tells me what is count. So what I'm going to do is create a new method. Since this is trying to get a static variable, and since it has nothing to do with any one instance of the class of an object, then what I can do here is create what's called a static method. A static method is otherwise known as a class method. A class method will be called on the class itself and can reference things like static variables, for example, but it has no instance variables to access because it's not actually going to be called on an object. So public static, and then this is going to return an integer because, like we said, we want to get the count. So get count, it's going to take in nothing, and what it's going to return is count. So the question is, how do we go and call this then? How do I actually call that function? Because what you might think here is that, well, I will system.out.println, and then, okay, so the name of that function was get count. And so hopefully that will return what I want it to, but shocker, it's not going to, but let's go see what it says. Oh, so it says that cannot find symbol. It doesn't know what get count is referring to. Like we said, get count is a static or otherwise known as a class method. It needs to be called on the class. We don't know what it's referring to. Whenever we called something, like if we were to write toString here, the reason that we know toString refers to the duck class is because it's being called on a duck. Get count is being called on an object. It's not being called on anything. So what we can do instead is call this on the duck class. I need to tell it what class it's actually coming from, and so if I say duck.getCount, then I can go ahead and, oh, that's not what I wanted. I can go ahead and run this. I've lost it. There it is. Aha, I've got 2. Fantastic. Right? So what's worth noting though is that these static methods, I mean, these are super, super useful to me because they don't need an object to be called upon. They can just be, methods that I create that can do whatever. And so I can write, for example, a whole nother class. And in fact, you've seen classes like this before that basically just have static methods. A lot of times we call them utility classes where, we're not intended to create objects from them. We're really just trying to access all these methods that are inside them. So let's go ahead and just look at a really quick example of that. Let's make a new class here. So the class that you have seen before that uses this to a high degree would be the math class. So let's actually use or make a new class that's going to be called math plus.java. And it's going to have some other methods in it. So math plus, what it's going to do is, so this is public class math plus. What it's going to have in it is some methods. So I'm not going to have any instance variables, for example. Like I'm not intending anyone to create an object for my math class. I just want to create some methods that are going to do some things. So let's talk about factorial. So for those of you who don't know what factorial is just a mathematical, I guess, function or operation, I guess would be a better term for it, where, for example, if I have 6 and then factorial would be the exclamation point, what that means is I want to take 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 and times 1. Okay, so 6 factorial, 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. And so I'm going to write the factorial method. And so what this is not an instance method, not an object-based method. This is just going to be a class method here. So what I'm going to say is public and static, and then it's going to return an integer, and I'm going to call this factorial. And what it's going to do is take in an integer value and return what the factorial that is. So I can do this with a loop pretty easily. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get the result here, and it's going to start off as 1. And what I'm going to do is for each value of I, so integer I equals 0, I is less than, I want to go all the way up to n, so I guess less than or equal to n. And then I plus plus, what I want to do is I just want, oh, what did I do? Oh, I put my brace inside of, oops. What I want to do is just multiply, oh, I don't want to start at 0, I want to start at 1. Oh, that could have been a disaster. What I want to do is just multiply 1 by 2 by 3 by 4 by 5 all the way up until I get to n. So what I will do is I will take result, and it will be equal, so times equals, and then whatever I is. And then I'm going to return, that's how you spell return, the result. Perfect. All right, so this will multiply 1 by 2 by 3 by 4 by 5 by 6 times, all the way up to whatever n is, and then return it. That sounds good. I think that's good. So what I've done is create this static method, right? The static method that, I mean, there are no, objects that, I mean, I could create an object from this class. I don't know why I would want to, but there are no instance variables or anything. This is just its own method that I can call. And so if I go back to, I'll just go put this in my duck tester because, why the heck not? So if I'm just curious, system.out.println, how do I call this? Well, so I have the factorial method, but again, or Java's not going to know what factorial is. It's a class method. I need to call it on the class. So math plus dot factorial, and then I can figure out the factorial. I don't know, what do we want to do? 7 sounds pretty good. And so what I've done is create a static method that I can then call over here in my other class, which is pretty fantastic. So what is it? Very exciting to find out. It's about 5040. Awesome. Okay, so that's what static variables and static methods are, right? The whole point of them is that static variables are not instance variables, right? They are not variables that each object has its own copy of it. All of the objects in a given class will be looking at the same static variables to reference them, just like we did with our duck counter to figure out what our new ID number should be. And then static methods are methods that are not called on an object, but rather called on the class, and thus cannot reference that particular object itself. So again, whenever I'm not creating things that involve classes, static methods are going to be my friend, and static variables are going to be my friend. I'll use them a lot. So yeah, that is the last thing that we're going to talk about in our journey through writing classes.